Well, how do there, chums? I found this interview with Sean Murray just the other year. It gives a good insight into not only his mind, but also the studio of Hello Games. Take a watch. I've tried to make it interesting by putting some video in the background, adding some music, but I will put a link to the full video inside the video description, unedited. Until next time, enjoy!
And that's what I thought, and I think a lot of people thought you were doing. You made Joe Danger, you made Joe Danger afterwards again, and then you went, I'm going to procedurally generate a fucking universe. Could you just talk me through the sort of the decision making that led you to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, actually, we were indie before it was cool. We're like the original hipster indie. Because actually, when we were leaving, so I remember leaving EA and saying I was going to make my own game. A bunch of friends. There wasn't really a way that you would bring it out to market. Actually, most people who had an indie game at the time, this makes me sound so old, and I am so old. Saying this, you would bring out a game and you would just host it on like a website or something like that. Steam generally wasn't putting out indie games at the time, like App Store didn't exist, which it didn't 10 years ago, which again just makes me sound so old. But yeah, that's kind of when we started up. That was what it looked like, and I remember people saying to me, "You're going to make a game and then what? Like sell it? Who's going to do that? Who's going to see it? Where are you going to sell it?" So we were right at that point, and about that time, kind of Limbo came out, and Geometry Wars, and kind of Braid, and I remember being at things like the IGF and being there in amongst all those games. So we were, we were at the IGF, obviously losing to those games, but Joe Danger was right about that time. So I guess we always had some sort of a kind of a mad streak. We had quite a nice job, and I was at the EA, had started at Criterion and kind of worked my way up and had quite a senior role and stuff. So there was no real reason for us to leave what we were doing. And I remember one of the founders of Hello Games, Dave Ream, I remember trying to convince him that he should pack up his perfectly nice job and, go off and make a game with no chance of success, basically. And there was a little bit of madness about it. I remember saying, we're making these huge, big games right now, and they're kind of skyscrapers, and they're built to like a blueprint. They have to be, right? There's 300 people working on them from day one. They've got to adhere to a very strict kind of architectural blueprint, and they've got to all look quite the same, right? If you're going to get that many people to work on something. And I remember sending him this email, and it had loads of pictures in it, and it was pictures of like kind of weird Swedish architecture, right? Just very pretentious, and saying, I want to make something a bit more like this. Right? Something that, like a house that you drive past and you have to stop the car and get out and look, right? And wouldn't it be cool to do that? And it sort of doesn't matter if it doesn't sell, right? Wouldn't it be cool to just make something of your own that you can say that's ours? And that kind of persuaded him to make this terrible decision and start Hello Games with us. But I guess it's not that we had an ego, but you say mad things to each other during that phase. And he was like, as long as, we one day go off and make our own skyscraper, right? I want to make crazy things, and I want to, and we were joking with each other, being like, we'll shut EA down when we're done another games or whatever. There was always just this slight streak of madness there. We were like, let's do something crazy. So we did Joe Danger, but it's hard making a game. That's one of the things I've learned, is that you start off even with a simple game idea, the simplest you can imagine, and for some reason through the creative process, you find a way to make it really hard for yourself. So we found Joe Danger, which is this simple game. We often talk about it being, almost harder than making No Man's Sky. We just, made our own engine, shipped on loads of platforms and things like that. And during that process, when we're going around to shows and going to PAX and GDC and stuff like that, we started to kind of, I guess, to help ourselves get through it, we would talk about what would be the big game that we'll make, years from now, not like the next thing we do, but what will be the big game that we make kind of 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when we've got lots of people working at Hello Games. And that started to become a conversation around No Man's Sky. I had kind of always had that idea in the back of my head, and I guess everyone has that kind of, it's a game where you can go anywhere and do anything. It's kind of game design written by a child, basically. And so we started to talk about that, and that helped us get through things. We're there working on Joe Danger, slogging, and it was just nice to have that dream, and we never really thought of it as a real thing. We did, I am getting around to answer your question of how we actually started. So, time passed, we worked on Joe Danger, and then Joe Danger 2. And Joe Danger 2 was supposed to be easy. We were like, Joe Danger 1 was really hard work, but 2 will be easy because we'll have more people, and we know what it is now, and whatever. And we just found ways to make it really hard, right? And it was a real slog, and we were back going to PAX and E3 and things like that, and seeing a lot of the same indies over and over again, kind of the guys from Capybara, Clay, or a lot of the kind of the Play Dead guys or whatever at all of these shows, and we're just back again in this routine. And we had come from, I'd been doing Burnout, just one Burnout after another, and I was like, I just escaped that, and now I kind of felt a little bit trapped. I now had a bunch of employees. We were about 10 people at the time. And I thought, I've sort of made this problem for myself. And you start thinking about what game are we going to do next? And, is that going to have lots of sequels? And thinking about games of the size of Joe Danger, it's quite hard out there. It is quite hard to make something like that. It's quite a slog, not knowing whether it will succeed or not, or trying to get lovely press people like yourself to write about it. You're basically pulling in a favor almost to get somebody to write about a game that isn't necessarily as big as the other games they're writing about. So we were, all of that was going on in my head, and we were having problems with kind of publishers and things like that. Around Joe Danger, and we'd released the game and it had just been completely buried. And I was just there one night. I had to stay basically all night to do a phone call with some people at Microsoft, on their time zone. I was just really worn down by it all, really frustrated, and I just started writing some code. I just started a new project, and that just made me feel nice. And by the time I got on the call with them, I'd been there basically all night. The office was empty, and I'd written a thing. And it was a little thing, a little demo of basically the start of No Man's Sky. So, being on a very crappy looking planet, but being able to go between planets. Kind of a voxel generated kind of world. I kind of embarrassingly, embarrassed showing the guys the next day, and it was just instant, like, right, we're doing it. There's that madness. Instantly, the guys were like, oh, fuck everything else, we're doing this, and that was basically the start of No Man's Sky. So that it gradually crept up on us, but it was there all the time. I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. I mean, you said there that the design document was like it was written by a child, right? That you could go anywhere, do anything, you could be an astronaut, get in a spaceship and all the rest of it. You're not worried that, you knew you were a small team, that you were aiming too high and that you were taking too much on?
Doesn't really occur to you. I mean, yes and no. right? Like you start making it and what you're doing is cool and you're enjoying what you're doing. And actually we split off the team. 4 of us went into a little room, we boxed it off inside in the studio. You couldn't even see in, and we had our own separate entrance and stuff. And we just started working on this thing, and it was a little bit crazy, and so we didn't want the rest of the team to start getting worried about what on earth are these guys doing, you know. So I would kind of work on that 3 days a week, and then come out and work on Joe Danger 2 days a week, and we kind of transitioned over to that. And we definitely felt like, I suppose, if I'm really honest, the thought process was, we have made some money from Joe Danger, we could go off and make another game of about that size, but it doesn't appeal to me, and I would rather Hello Games just go bankrupt than do that. You know, I wanted to either stop doing that or do something new, and I don't mind if doing something new, like, you know, better to go do something crazy that we're enjoying and it fail than go make another game of that size which may potentially fail. So there was a moment of like, we want to jump, you know, from this fast-moving train to this other fast-moving train kind of thing. And that just, you know, it's a bit of madness, but the alternative didn't seem particularly sane either. It just didn't appeal. So we were like, let's just go for broke. And there was a feeling of, you know, gathering momentum, I guess. You know, you're pushing the snowball. No Man's Sky, when it started off, had a very simple art style. And then it just got better and better, you know, and we kind of went a little bit crazier and a little bit crazier. And one of us would do something that, you know, you would look at and go, oh, I guess we're doing that now. And then the next one would, and the next one would. You know, just kind of amplified. And that all, at each stage, seemed fun, you know. But yes, at various points, like when we would show the game at E3, you suddenly go, oh, fuck, what are we making, you know? This is very, you know, obviously overwhelming for, at that point, you know, about 6 people making that game. The average team size on No Man's Sky over the 4 or 5 years was about 6 people. We were 15 when we shipped, you know, and that's including like publishing and QA and things like that. It was pretty insane.
I mean, the announcement obviously sent a shockwave, I think, through people and, you know, through the industry. And I can't remember a game quite like it for what it did to the people that were waiting for it. And I think that partly it was because of the core promise of the game, that you can go anywhere and do anything. People inferred from that, oh, maybe it'll have this in it, maybe it'll have this in it. Maybe. Other things that were implied in interviews or whatever. But you must have realized at some point as you were running up to launch that the game we're making is not necessarily what a lot of people on the internet think we're making. Did you realize that you were going to have problems at launch, like before you launched?
No, interestingly, our core community were a lot more clued in, it felt, as to what the game was, kind of thing. You know, like an example for me was always like people were unclear as to whether they would say multiplayer and what multiplayer looked like in the game and things like that. Actually, at the time of launch, the Steam forums had this massively upvoted kind of thread for us to add multiplayer, right? Containing death threats if we didn't and things like that, you know? And so we're looking at that and we're seeing that side of the world. You know, no part of our brain is thinking people are unclear about this, right? But you don't realize as a developer that you're talking to millions of people when you do something like E3, right? And most people who buy your game have only ever seen one video. They've probably only seen like 30 seconds of it, right? And so it's very hard to kind of tell the difference between you talking excitedly about a game, because you are excited and the people that we were talking to would be excited about it. And you're talking about development, and that's what we were always used to doing, you know. we didn't realize, no part of our brains was thinking, you know, oh, well, what's our marketing plan here? And, you know, what's the feature list that people are clear on? We kind of, in our heads, always think, I don't know, I still do when I'm talking to press. I feel like, well, I'm talking to peers who completely understand how game development works and are interested in it. And largely you are, you know? Largely you are, and it kind of kills me that we don't see that much of that in terms of journalism these days, in terms of games journalism, where people talk freely and educate people about kind of games development and how it works and what's going on behind the scenes. But there's a disconnect there where we, you know, we know clearly, to us, we're like, behind the scenes, obviously, you know, some features are working and some aren't. Things that we intend to do work out and sometimes they don't. We've taken, you know, we've cut this feature, but we've added this other cool one back in or whatever, you know, this works like this now. You know, we're just going back and forth through that again as a handful of people just making our game. And what thought process was going through our mind coming up to release was like, just, you know, don't die doing this, basically. You know, it was just like, you know, we were working so ridiculously hard and under so much pressure, just the idea of delivering it. And for us, there was this core concept which was there from day one, right? When we first showed it at the VGXs, the thing that no one could believe that we would do, and if you look back to the old video, just all the YouTube comments are just so skeptical of the idea of having a procedural universe, having planets that you can go and land on. Still no one's really done that, you know, to have full 3D planets that you can land on and walk around and explore. Is a super cool thing that no one else has done. I know that, you know, lots of far bigger teams are trying, kind of thing, you know, whether it's Star Citizen or Elite Dangerous, you know, the Mass Effect Andromeda tried, that kind of thing. And so we're there thinking, we've done it. We've done the thing that no one has done before, you know, and the thing that everyone is doubtful as to whether we can do. And I'm still incredibly proud of that. And at launch, I still look at that game and I'm so proud of what this small team has done, but also the vision to me, I'm sat playing the game that I always had in my head, you know, and that the team always had, and I can see all the different members of the team and their impact on it, and, you know, real delivery of features that they really cared about from day one, that they've been working on for years. So you are in your own little bubble, you know, and that's what you're thinking of, and that's still kind of, I don't know, when I work on a game day to day, that's still what I think about, you know, the craft of making the game. That journey is what I'm doing it for, you know.
Clearly a lot of people disagreed at launch, and I think that it's quite a common problem now, but I feel like you guys were at the sharp end of it, and maybe in the early days of it, that there was a scandal. You got death threats, you got the police involved. Like, I don't want to go over the specifics of that at all, but tell me about your thought process, I guess, when stuff like that is happening, as a game developer, as a boss, and just as a human being.
Yeah, it's a unique set of circumstances to have wanted to make something since you were a kid, to then make that thing, and then go through the craziness of this really polarized audience that we have now, you know, in terms of making games. There was something that helped a lot, you know, which is a bit of a cheat, in that we could see something that, you know, no one else could. We could see that there were millions of people playing the game, you know, and enjoying it. Now, some of those people who were, you know, really angrily asking for features or whatever, you know, we can see that they've played for 100 hours, multiple 100 hours in the first few weeks, which is nuts, right? You know, and that gives a very different tone to what somebody is saying to you. What they're saying is, this is the game that I really want to play, you know? This is a game I've dreamed of forever and I really want to enjoy it. and I can't because of this, or I've played 200 hours and now I'm bored, but there's nothing else for me. This is what I want. This is my thing, right? That gives a different tone to it. We did, look, there were a few weeks there, or maybe longer, where I wasn't this logical and I wasn't this clear on what I should do, right? But reasonably quickly, I kind of came upon just treating this overwhelming noise like I suppose any programmer would. Just treating it as kind of data. So just taking it and categorizing it, building out spreadsheets of it and bringing in other people to help do that, and just try to pull out some signals from that noise, right? So we found that a huge percentage of people talking about the game online didn't own or play the game, which is not that surprising, I guess, but it's really nice to see how large that percentage is. So that's about 70 or 80% of conversation around it. And most of those things are about things that are kind of nothing to do with us. So the problems of pre-ordering or price point or whatever. I think there are problems with that in the industry, but I have no ability to change those, right? We're this tiny little team. That's a problem that sits over there, and so there's a niceness to that, just going, okay. And you see that around any game that has that kind of polarized launch. A lot of the conversation is around that. It's aimed at the developers, but it's aimed at, things that those developers can't change, right? And they're interesting conversations to have, but, they're probably misplaced, right? But then once you get rid of that, you start to get down to something really interesting, right? You get to this point where you're actually reading somebody and they've played the game a lot, so they know it quite well. This is almost your second biggest kind of group, or your second most important group. Once you get rid of that noise, it starts to become really clear that there's people out there who are just saying something simple like, I don't like your inventory system, right? And once you get to that point, as a developer, I just look at that and I'm like, well, I can fix that. Literally, I will go in tomorrow and I will fix that. But also, I kind of agree with that. That has always bothered me. And we have a lot in common now, because you've played it for a couple of hundred hours and I've played it for a couple of hundred hours. Right? A lot of the other noise is really hard to listen to, because you're like, this doesn't seem like stuff that I want to be listening to. But this, I have a lot in common with you guys. We have both played this game for hundreds of hours. And I agree, that does really annoy me, and that's actually quite nice, I'm not saying this whole process was nice or anything like that, but that for me has really helped. And you can see that with how we've worked on updates from there on. But all of this is kind of driven by this core, secret truth underneath, that we are watching, the average person. So we sold many millions of copies. The average person's playing for 25 hours, right? Which is much higher. It doesn't sound that much. 25 hours of playing a game. I will play a bunch of games a year for 25 hours, but the average game, AAA game, is nowhere near that kind of number generally, right? That's an extremely high number. So we're looking at that, and we know that people either are enjoying it or want to enjoy it more, and that there's an audience for it. And that's probably, we get a lot of credit of being really altruistic, just making the game better for no reason whatsoever. But it's clear that people are enjoying it, so that that's much easier, to conceptualize of and to kind of motivate yourself to do.
You've changed the way you communicate as a studio as a result of all of this, I think. The first is that you've pretty much stopped doing press, which I understand completely. We're terrible, awful people.
He says in front of all these people, talking to someone in the press.
And you're doing interviews after this. But you stopped using press as a way of speaking to your players, right? I think that's the first thing that's interesting. The second thing is that you decided to communicate with players through patch notes. And I think that's something that people in this room could really do with hearing the thinking behind, because with a living game, there is a school of thought that says you need people talking about this all the time, which means you want to be talking to them all the time. But if you're only talking to shit, that sort of flies in the face of maybe the accepted wisdom.
It's really, so we went about 2 years without talking to press at all, right? After ship, we went about 3 months or something like that without saying anything to the community. That was really hard. Like, actually, I sat down so many times and wrote, like, you know, the perfect blog post that was going to explain, you know, everything about development and where things were and what the roadmap was for the future. I just did that so many times. But I could see that it didn't hold credibility, for right or wrong, where we were at. And I see this with, you see it all the time after there have been a number of games since, you're right, we were kind of one of the first and there wasn't really a template. But I've seen time and time again a game come out, have a polarized kind of launch, have that explosive mix of loads of people playing it, but also problems, you know. And I can see, you know, EA or Microsoft or whoever, you know, Bethesda try to placate players by just talking to them, you know. And for right or wrong, it just doesn't really work and it doesn't resonate. So I think in hindsight, we probably did the right thing. Not talking to press was easy because I don't really enjoy it. So in a way, it was, you know, lovely that you are, Nathan.
Thank you.
You know, it's not the thing I got into games to do or whatever. I don't think I'm particularly good at it. So it was kind of an easy answer there. I'm never sure whether it was the right thing or whether it just really appealed, right? I think the reason for not talking to press was for a bunch of the press when I was growing up was kind of upstream of the community, right? So what they wrote, I would read, and as a kid, I would think those things. I would just, you know, be led by what journalists said, and it was a huge part of forming my ability to, like, critique games and to think about how games were made. And I would read Edge and stuff like that as a kid. Like, I pretty much got into games through that. I applied to, you know, games companies only through reading Edge, you know, and seeing the ads and kind of applying directly through that, and had no idea that you could really actually work in games before I was reading Edge. But, you know, that would lead my thought process and kind of tell me how to feel about development and how to feel about games and things. I don't think that happens as much now. I think the problem with what we see on front pages being led by, you know, by what we click on, means that naturally you tend to read what the most people think. You know, that tends to be what you even see when you go to a website, which means that they're naturally kind of downstream of the community. So if the community all thinks the thing, like, we would see it all the time. There would be actually loads of positive articles coming out about No Man's Sky, but they just don't do as well, you know? Like, that's the problem. So there's no point in us talking to the press and doing an interview and sitting down and trying to explain ourselves. But also it felt kind of like we didn't want to do it, and it felt kind of false, right? So there's just this real purity. If you say to a team, okay, we're not going to say anything, and if you want to say anything to the community, they're all like shouting at you like crazy and all that kind of thing. If you want to communicate to them, then we've got to do an update. We've got to release something. It will only be through patch notes. It's kind of a really freeing thing. So then it starts to form your thinking, like, well, how quickly can we get an update out? You know, and what can be in it? What do we want to say with this? It's a weird way of thinking, but it's sort of a nice way of thinking. And just thinking, we're not going to say anything beforehand. It's going to drop from nowhere. We're going to do a video. That video is your way of communicating. And it also just saved loads of energy. I think if we had talked, you see this all the time where a big publisher will try to talk to a community and try to resolve a problem, and and then just get embroiled, and it just gets, more and more communication, more and more headspace. We're this tiny group. We just didn't have that time, really.
The game has grown enormously, or broadened maybe enormously over the years. At some point, I assume you're gonna put down your pens and walk away, as it were. When you've made a universe and then built on that universe, how do you ever know when it's finished?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. There's other things we want to do, and so that's a battle that happens. That I have to fight between No Man's Sky and other things that we're doing. There's a balance there, It's more of a creative thing, I think, rather than a commercial thing. So, even though No Man's Sky has been very, commercially nice to us, and Next that we released last year, we didn't know how well it would do, but it did, incredibly well. It was kind of like a AAA type launch. So that's really nice, but we're generally driven by what we want to do creatively. So we're doing Beyond at the moment, and that, this is probably an insight into, it's a roundabout way of answering you. We had planned out what everyone has told us to do, of every few months, do a small update, right? That's how you kind of keep your concurrency and keep people playing, and that's what every games as a service game tends to do. We hadn't really done it before, and after Next, we were like, no, this time, we're going to do it. And every time we tried to do it before, we'd end up making our updates bigger and bigger, and in the end, they'd, slip out and we'd ship them later, and they would be huge, We're like, right, we need to just make sure we don't do that again. And we're all looking at each other, okay, we know the plan. And then we did 2 or 3 smaller updates, one every kind of month, and we were doing weekly community events, and it was going really well, and our numbers were high, and the community's happy, all of those things. And then there's part of the team who's working on the one that's supposed to come out, you divide the team up, and there's some people working on the one that comes out after month 1, people working on the one that comes out after month 2. And there's these guys who, had until month 4, and another few people who had until month 5. And you're like, okay, we've shipped the first few, let's just check how everyone's doing. And they've gone absolutely nuts, And you're like looking at it, you're like, how are we going to ship this next month? And worse than that, they're like, we've all been talking, and we've interwoven all these features, and look at how cool it could be, Sean, if we had this with this, And so one group's like, we've made it work in VR, and that's no small thing, And then there's another group who've massively expanded what we're doing with online, and then they're showing me those two things working together. It's just really, it's creatively driven. We just sat there and we're like, I guess we're doing another big update, And that's how it's been so far. That is genuinely, those are the conversations that happen. It's way less planned than I should pretend we've had this plan all along. So we're working on a roadmap, but it's literally month to month going, oh shit, I guess we're doing this now, The moment that would stop is if any of the team weren't looking at me excitedly, chatting about what they're doing. We have no interest in just doing and here's another gauntlet or helmet or whatever for this week. We just don't really have much interest in that, and it doesn't inspire us creatively. And it seems like it works fine. It seems that so far that's been a fine way to continue. Generally, Hello Games actually, the moment we started No Man's Sky, has been very, very creatively driven. Actually, something like Joe Danger was a little bit more, what's a small game that we can do in a time frame type of thing. And this is much more what do we get excited about, And it has just continued that way over the last few years.
Yeah, what does the future of the studio look like? Because I mean, you think back to the founding story from earlier, and you and Dave go, oh, we're going to kill it, yay, let's kill it. And I think you've mentioned Bethesda in the past, as well as a studio, as a sort of company that you aimed at almost, or you wanted to be compared to. Like, is the future of Hello Games still small comparatively? Do you have ambitions to grow? Like, do you want to be 100 people making 3-4 things at once, or do you like it as you are now?
You've like touched one of my buttons there. The industry is like obsessed with number of people working in a studio. Like, anytime I meet other studio heads, they're always like, oh, how many people are you now? And they start telling me how many people they are, as if that's how successful you are. I just have no interest in that. It just doesn't. It's not that we want to stay a certain size or we don't or whatever. It's just like, how many amazingly talented people can you find that all get on well together and have fun together and they're creatively inspired? That's the size you should be. And there's no part of me that's interested in aiming for a certain size as like success. But and in a weird way, we're always trying to grow. We're always like, if we find someone we really get on with, really want to work with them. And we're in a really nice position where we have a nice new office and we're very kind of well-funded studio and things like that. We're in a unique position as being like a AAA type studio, making games that sit on retail shelves and sell big numbers and things like that, but being small. There's very few studios that get to do that. And kind of not having publishers generally. So it's really nice. That gives us loads of freedom. People around me have kind of assumed, and I think I would have assumed during No Man's Sky, they'd always have said, once you get this out of your system, then you're going to stop, right? You're going to stop, right? You guys are going to take it easy. And yeah, it just hasn't gone away, annoyingly. Whatever, I talked to one of the guys from Naughty Dog, and they were saying each time an Uncharted comes out, it's like, this one will fill the gaping hole, Maybe all the awards will go in, and it'll fill the hole this time. Yeah. And he's like, no, then we sit down and let's make another one, but this one will. No, for us, we just, we've been dreaming of other stuff that we want to do, We're doing some of that, like some of the big updates that we're doing. VR, for instance, is something I've always wanted to do, and it's really exciting to me. It's really lovely to see a team just kind of get to grips with new hardware that they've never used before and do something kind of exciting. So as part of that, we're doing this smaller game, The Last Campfire, things like that. We've got something else going on at the studio. It's exciting. Yeah, and it is unfortunately just going to be ambitious stuff, Like, basically, we had a little chat, actually, after No Man's Sky, and I've decided that making games is really hard. Like, it just is, no matter what game you pick.
Has this just it's just recently occurred to you?
Yeah. No matter what you pick, you talk to any developer, you meet other developers, and they start off and you meet them right at the start, and they come to you and they say, oh, we're breaking away, and we're making this little physics puzzler or something like that, or it's a Tetris clone or something like that. And then you meet them like 3 years later, and they've got a massive beard, and they're like, it's got, 300-player multiplayer, or whatever, And they've just found a way to, fuck themselves, basically. And that just happens, like, we all do it, And so, weirdly, my conclusion from that is, let's make something really crazy and ambitious, because it's going to be hard anyway. Like, Joe Danger was really hard, No Man's Sky was really hard, and they're actually kind of comparable levels of hardness. But No Man's Sky had a real impact, had like hundreds of millions of hours played. So let's do that. Let's do crazy, silly things like that. And as well, it just hadn't been done before, so that's interesting. And sort of, we're okay commercially, so let's go nuts, you know, is my summary. And you will meet me 3 years from now and my beard will be down to here.
Nothing wrong with that.
What have I done? Why didn't somebody stop us?
Excellent. I wanted to end, if I may, on your contentment graph, which I learned about very recently and kind of fascinated me a little bit. I think you're a bit strange, and you decided to start plotting your happiness on a graph on a daily basis, and you asked some other people around you to do the same. And you got something quite interesting out of it. Could you talk us through it?
Yeah, that's not straight. Look, you know, who doesn't do that, right? No, you go through a thing, I suppose the secret is, after No Man's Sky, I definitely had a moment of, why are we making games? Do we want to continue doing this? It would seem sensible for us to have stopped after No Man's Sky, right? After it came out, we could, you know, go live on an island or something like that, right? It had to have been easier than the noise that we were dealing with, right? And it just made sense commercially and all of those reasons. It wouldn't seem appealing to come back into work every day. And I sort of had to think, like, but I am. And I couldn't really answer the people around me, like, why do I do this, you know? And making games is hard. As discussed, being an indie developer is hard, you know? So I actually started to think about, lots of people asking me, like, but are you happy? You know, this is a bit of a weird thing to talk about in front of all these people, but, you know, do you enjoy making games or whatever? And I started to kind of plot things out, right? How am I feeling every day? I did that actually during No Man's Sky and then after. The thing I found, let's leave the talk here, bad conclusion is, like, on average, probably less happy, right? You know, concepting a game is really fun, then working on it is a little bit less fun, then production is a little bit less fun, then shipping it is less fun, and then it doesn't make any sense, but getting the bastard thing out should be fun, but isn't, you know, no matter what game I've worked on, it's really hard. And then I kind of checked that with other game developers, and I asked them, like, what's your graph? And they just sketched me one. But everyone just naturally sketched the same thing, right? And I've had a chat with people about that, and it really helped me. My conclusion is that actually, you know, I was saying to you, a little bit like having kids. People say the same thing. They are on average less happy than before they had kids, right? And their single friends are more happy. I remember showing this graph that I'd done of games development to my brother, who was one of the people who was like, why are you doing this to yourself? And he saw the graph and he was like, that's kids, you know, straight away. He's got 4 kids of his own. And he was like, but if you, in talking that through with him, and there's actually a bunch of talks about this, and it is really clearly true. Like that, there's loads of studies that back this up. You are on average less happy. But if you zoom in on a particular day, while the graph is doing this, if you zoom in on a day, your life has gone from this very steady rhythm to massive peaks and troughs, like literally hour to hour. And that's how I feel about, you know, kids, and that's how I feel about games development, is, you know, every day I'm getting to experience these kind of existential highs that I wouldn't have had before, you know, and lows, right? You know, from the moment of just conceiving of an idea, to writing the code, to seeing it not compile, to then getting it to compile, to finding a bug, to trying to ship it, you know, and it's just hour to hour. And like, I wouldn't trade that for anything, you know, that's so enjoyable, and you get these moments that you couldn't possibly get otherwise. You know, you get these high highs, and it's important to get the lows so that you can experience those things. And that's really helped me, you know, like, that's why I do it. And it's fine that, you know, that there's difficulty that goes on with that. That's part of the trade-off, you know. Yeah, that was kind of my conclusion.
Amazing. That's all we've got time for. I hope you've learned the most important lessons today, which is that making games is hard and you shouldn't do it, and do not under any circumstances have children. Thank you very much.
So people, my main takeaways from that is Hello Games is a studio that's going to continue making updates for No Man's Sky, why people are still playing No Man's Sky, which is good because they've just won an award for simply that, being one of the most played games to date, even though it's quite an old game, which is a pretty awesome achievement. And yes, they also mentioned there that they are going to be working on something equally as ambitious. In fact, all their games from here on in are going to be large, ambitious games because that's their main focus. So hopefully we're going to see extremely exciting titles coming from the Hello Games studio, and I'm hoping 2024 will be the year that we hear something about their new intellectual property, a new game, an ambitious title. Thank you for watching, people. Goodbye.